This week, we are going to kind of, I guess, kind of maybe do a little precursor to that, because everything that I'll talk about today is going to relate to needs that youth have. Usually when we talk about substance use, or when I hear it talked about substance misuse, substance use, substance abuse, there's a part of the conversation that's missing. And I hope to bring that into the conversation today. So when we talk about needs in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for example, there are needs that are getting met when people are choosing to start and people are choosing to continue. And so, so I hope that you find the connection between this week and next week. Again, I'm Joronda. And in addition to the bio that Kathleen gave you all, I'm also a mom. I'm a mom of 4. And so I spend a lot of my waking hours with kids. I have 4 kids that range in age from 6 to 14 years old. And with that range in age, this is what my 2nd year being the parent of a teenager. Never in my life before 2 years ago was I the parent of a teen. Now, I've been the parent of toddlers for many, many years, but each stage is very different. So before I give too much more of my bio, we will be very interactive in here today. So if you have your camera on or off, it's okay. Whatever is comfortable for you, but I will ask you to drop a few lines in the chat box. So just so that I make sure everyone knows where the chat is. I think we're super zoomed now and we probably all know how to get there, but just so that I know that we do, go ahead and drop me a hi in the chat box. Just so I know we know where it is. There we are. Awesome. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Wonderful. So as you're doing that hi and you found the chat box, hi, Betty. The kids that you're concerned about, the kids that you have connections with, that you are in here today for, how old are those kids? I told you mine range in age from 6 to 14. So I have a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 14-year-old. How about you? Go ahead and drop that in the chat box. What are the ages of the kids or kid that you're in here for? Okay. Okay, so we have 8. We have the young adults, 19, 21, the older adolescents, 17, 18, 15, the early teens, 14. Okay, awesome. 0 to 25, I think that's Betty. Okay, awesome. So we have a lot of support and representation in here for the teen years. A lot of representation for the teen years. So let me start by saying there is a difference in the way that we work with our kids over the years, but there is no difference in that idea of prevention. There is no difference in that idea of prevention. The method that we use may change, and honestly, everything that I know I learned from a 2-year-old. Every time I had a 2-year-old, I learned so much more. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my PowerPoint so you all can see it. And I just have to give a little disclaimer. When I'm looking up, I'm actually looking at you all. It just feels so rude to me to look up. I have multiple screens. So I'm gonna have my PowerPoint down in front of me, but I'm gonna be looking at all of your beautiful faces above me. Alrighty, so let me go ahead and share this screen and let's get started on this topic. This topic could take a ton of time. We are going to scratch the surface. We're talking about keeping our kids safe, and we're talking about the reality of substance misuse. And I have to make sure that I'm using that term misuse. For so long in my career, we just use the term use, just simply use. There is substance use that occurs for the intention of helping or aiding someone. And when we start to talk about this opioid crisis, a lot of it began with intentional use for the purpose of creating something better, a better quality of life for someone. So I'm gonna use the term misuse quite a bit, because what ends up happening is, or what has ended up happening is, people found their way to unfortunate abuse by misusing the substances. That's one way. So go here. There we go. So the three areas that we'll cover today, we're going to look at what are opioids. We're just going to take just a general look to get an understanding of, we hear that term sometimes, and sometimes we hear another term coupled with it, but what does that actually mean? What are opioids? What fits in the category of opioids? We're also going to look at the spectrum of use. No one wakes up and says, you know what, I think I want to be addicted to something. It doesn't happen that way. It is a path that takes, in some cases, a lot of time, in some cases, not much time, but there is a spectrum and people fall in different places on that spectrum. And then we will look at accidental overdose. Okay, so let's start with opioids. And I say / opiates because there is a difference. On my left side of the screen, which should also be your left side of the screen, you will see a list of substances that fall into the category opioids or opiates. When you take a look at that list, I'm going to pop up my one and only poll for today. And that poll is asking you, has your family or friends been impacted by opioids or opiates? So it's just a yes or no, and it is anonymous. So go ahead and click yes or no. And we'll see what we look like as a community today.
And Jackie, I don't have access to the poll, so you'll keep us informed that it's up and people are participating?
Yes, we are a little more than halfway, so people are still answering. We're almost there.
We'll take our time. We just want to, I just can't see it. It doesn't come to me.
Okay, we're about 80%.
And Joronda, while I cannot participate in the poll, I do have friends who have had their adolescent children fall into the substance abuse of Oxycontin. So I would be saying yes when you said friends or family. And that was a very sad time in their life, very hard time in their lives.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So as soon as we get, are we there?
It looks like we're at 40. I think there's a few like the interpreter and.
Okay. I submitted mine.
Okay.
So again, have you had friends or family who've been impacted by opioids? Now the impact, that's whatever you make that to mean. I'm not looking for one particular type of impact, just impacted.
So I'm going to go ahead and end it. It looks like everybody's answered.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so in just this community this morning, with those of us who are on here this morning at 10:54 a.m., we have 60%, the majority of our community this morning has been impacted, has had friends or family who've been affected by opioids. So what do I mean when we're talking about opioids? When you look at this list on the left-hand side, there is a combination of the two. You have opioids, which are both synthetic and organic, meaning that they are man-made and they have maybe some components that were grown. And then you have opiates, which are just organic. So both of these are derived from the poppy flower, right? The poppy plant. And you have things like fentanyl that was created so that's number 4 on the list. Fentanyl that didn't come directly from that poppy plant, but that was created to have a higher level of strength to help, for example, someone who may be dealing with terminal cancer to deal with the pain. The medical use for fentanyl was to help in those times when a community is in great need because of extreme pain, right? That's one of the major reasons that the synthetics were created. But I'll go back to number 1. Number 1 is codeine. Codeine on the list, if you're old enough, you may remember when codeine was over the counter. At some point between the 80s and 90s, you had to get a prescription for codeine. That's once it got to the point where it was being misused or abused quite a bit. So codeine is derived from that poppy plant as well, and everything on this list is. If we fast forward to the 2000s, OxyContin kind of hit the scene. It was a little bit before the 2000s, but really in the early 2000s is when we started seeing the prescription OxyContin. And it was prescribed for a lot of different things. I had 4 children, and each of those children, after those births, I was prescribed OxyContin for pain relief. And it became kind of that, it became that substance that we got very familiar with. OxyContin, oxycodone. The only difference between those two is Tylenol versus oxycodone having Tylenol in it, and OxyContin, we typically know that term to be Percocet. So Percocet versus Percodan. So when people are referring to opioids, again, it's synthetic and organic versus just organic, okay? All righty. There we are. So how are these used? I want you to remember this list, because when we look at how the opioids are used, when we specifically get to start talking about our youth, I want you to remember 1 through 4 on here. So opioids or opiates can be used, they can be swallowed, they can be smoked, they can be snorted, they can be injected. There is a spectrum here in how people choose to use them. So with that spectrum, typically an individual doesn't start at number 4. They don't start with injecting. Typically, when we look at how opioids has grown over the last, since about 2012, typically people have started with swallowing them during this crisis. But if we go back to the Vietnam era, if we go back to when that war was the talk of the US, we saw people using heroin coming back from the war, and that wasn't swallowed. That also typically was not snorted. Occasionally it was smoked, occasionally, but even not as popular as injection. I will never forget, I was sitting on a plane. I live in Arizona. I was heading to California, and I was reading a book trying to get my knowledge up and current drug trends. And in this book, the gentleman was talking about smoking heroin and that heroin was coming back. And I thought, this guy must be losing his mind. No way. This has been like, that's gone. Because at that time, heroin was considered like the dirty drug, right? And I put quotes behind there because my request of you all is going to be to make a change a little bit later in the presentation as well. But I thought, no, people have such a perception. They have such thoughts around if someone is using, misusing, abusing heroin, there is a thought of what type of person that is. We stigmatize substance use in general, but then some substances have a bigger stigma than others. So as I'm sitting on this plane and I see this, I'm like, what is this guy talking about? Smoking heroin. And he said, the reason that it would come back and the reason that it was coming back and that it would be easier to use is because the method, the way that it is being used now, or the way that people are trying to use it, was not based on injecting it. This was probably in about 2003, And I will never forget that, sitting on that plane, because I thought, no way. And here we are in 2022. In the middle of a crisis, and we're like really deep into the crisis now. And injection is not, it is not the main method of use, especially when we talk about people being introduced to it. Swallowing it with opioids is the first method, and then it gets, people get more, try different methods as they get more deeper into the substance misuse. Okay, so why do people use? What happens with opioids? So what I do want you to understand is that there are 3 different categories when we talk about why a person is using. So very clearly labeled here, you have tolerance, you have dependence, and then you have an opioid use disorder. So tolerance and dependence, those are kind of, they have expected ways that people go about those. With tolerance, that just means that your response to the substance is not the same as the first time. So sometimes you may have heard that term, the person is chasing the high. So with tolerance, that person has developed something in their system that says they need more in order to feel the way they felt the first time. And then in order to feel the way they felt the second time. Usually tolerance is developed with more frequent use. So the more a person uses, the greater their tolerance develops. So they have to use the substance more frequently, and they have to use more of the substance to get that initial high. That's tolerance. Dependence. Dependence, we know that a person is experiencing or is within dependence when they try to stop, but their body is going through, or their mind is going through withdrawals. When they feel like they have physical withdrawals and emotional withdrawals, that person, if they stop abruptly, they have those withdrawals, more than likely they're dealing with dependence, meaning that in order to feel normal, they have to put that in their system to keep those withdrawals from happening. That's dependence. Okay. But when we move to substance use disorder, this is when the behavior becomes problematic. A person goes from wanting it to needing it. Dependence is needing it, but now they're seeking it and they don't care about the consequences. And it's not a thought that I just want to do this now. This seeking behavior is more likely without any thought. It's compulsive. And it is, regardless of what's happening. You see people lose money, they lose jobs, they lose relationships with family. I'm going to have you all drop that in the chat box. What are some other things that you see people losing when they get to the point of a disorder? An opioid use disorder, or let's say a substance use disorder. I'm going to pull up my chat box so I can see you. Absolutely. Jobs. Yep. Yes, their kids. Yes. Housing. Absolutely. Trust. How many people say no more, no longer? I don't want to deal with this person. They lose their support systems. Lots of relationships damaged and lost. They lose family. And yes, Marlene, they lose self-esteem. The care about self, even just the general upkeep. Brushing my teeth today, putting on clean clothes, taking a shower, even sleeping. All of those things, they lose a lot of that. They definitely also experience that loss of self-respect. They just simply lose themselves. So a substance use disorder is going to be down the line when we talk about spectrum of use. Thank you all for dropping that in there. So when we talk about spectrum of use, let's go over there. So you have in your state, in 2020, oh, California is spelled wrong, California. You have over 8,000 people who died from an opioid overdose in 2020. Now that California, you all have the highest number, just raw number in the US. You have the highest number. However, you also have the most people. So when you look at per capita, or when you look at per 100,000 people, you guys actually fall 14th on the list. Because when you have more people, you're going to have more incidents of overdoses, or the likelihood of more incidences of overdoses. So in California, and then when I say 8,000, you guys are actually you were almost at 9,000 for 2020. So you've got about 21, almost 22 people per 100,000 died from an opioid overdose in 2020. Why were people misusing? Now, if we understand that the possibility of death is there, or the possibility of overdose, I could overdose without a fatality, without dying. There's still a risk there. So when I look at that, what would be the reason to take that chance? Why did people end up misusing? Well, one, pain management. Pain management was a huge one. You have a, let's say you have a gentleman, and I'm making, this is actually, I'm not going to make it fictitious. I sat on a call center on an evening where we opened up lines to make sure that everyone across my state had the ability to call in to ask for help. And I picked up the phone, and a gentleman on the line was in his 60s, and he wanted to make sure that no one knew he was calling, knew his name, and he proceeded to tell me that he was taking pain medication from a back injury that he got because he was in construction and was injured in construction. And so he had to have this back surgery, started taking the pills for pain management, and found that he could not get off of them without those withdrawal symptoms. So remember, I said withdrawal, right? When you get to dependence, you experience withdrawal. And this gentleman felt things that you all put in the chat box. He felt like he couldn't do his job anymore. He felt like he couldn't be honest in his relationships. He was doing things that he had never done before, and he had never developed a substance use dependency in his life before taking the prescribed medication for pain management. So this was his reason for misuse, and now he's looking at, how do I stop this? I don't know how to stop this on my own. People develop a tolerance. And so that's another reason that they continue to misuse, because in order to feel good, like for this gentleman, in order for his back to feel good, for the pain to be managed, he needed to take more. People also do it to cope with stress. And coping with stress can come in a lot of forms. Let's talk about your kids. What are some of the stresses that your kids, the youth that you are here for, what are some of the stresses that they are under, even if they are 4 years old? What are some of the stresses that they're under? Go ahead and drop that in the chat box. I've got my chat open. Yes, isolation was a huge one, Marlene. We just all experienced this collective isolation with COVID, yes, in 2020 and 2021. And with that, we also saw more dysfunctionality in families. And we also saw more peer pressure online. I won't dive too much into online, but there are some things that I need to make sure that you're prepped for, especially if you have teens, just in case you don't know some of these things. But with social media, we'll talk about that just a little bit. And if I forget, please remind me. Being placed out of their home, absolutely. Youth, more than anything, want to stay with family, want to stay with people who they know and love, regardless of what the situation is. And being placed out of a home is a very stressful situation. Misbehavior in academic performance. And we have seen a decline in academic performance post homeschool. It was very difficult to be at home. And I'll give you my own. One of my kids, my youngest child, was just in the process of learning to read as we went into pandemic, and trying to learn to read online. Whew, that was not a good situation. As much as we are behind him and supporting him in school, and his siblings are, the stress of learning to read online didn't really work for him. Well, for him, he would just sprinkle Legos on the floor and have the camera up to the ceiling every time I went in to check what is going on. And this guy is this guy is doing school the way that he wanted to. But now post-pandemic, we see he's trying to catch up in learning to read, and that can be a point of stress for a child when they see other people are doing it, or they feel like they're supposed to do it at this time. That can be a point of stress. The last reason for misuse is people experimenting to get high. It may not be the first substance that they use, but they may be going down that line, down that spectrum to experiment. So I'm going to actually pull up the line for you so you can understand what is this line that I'm talking about. So reasons that people continue to use, let's talk about this line. So I want you to imagine whatever room you're sitting in, that there is a straight line where people are lined up on a line, just wherever you are. there's a line. People are lined up on this line. Doesn't have to be people you know, just people are lined up on a line. For me, it goes from this window to this door over here next to me, okay? So to my left, this is gonna be the start of the line. And we are trying to make our way to the right, okay? So on this spectrum, if I've never used before, I'm not even on the line at all. But once I use for the first time, I jump on the line. So I'm gonna fast forward, so we'll come back to that in the youth portion, but I want you to remember that line, that first use is jumping on the line. When we talk about people experimenting to get high, that is a little bit further down the line, but that's not yet at the point all the way down there of dependence and then addiction and substance use disorder. That takes some time, that takes some intention to stay on that line, to continue on that line, where tolerance builds on that line, and we keep walking further and further down the line, getting ourselves to the point of substance use disorder and dependence. So some of the reasons that people continue to use and stay on that line is because of the tolerance, they need it. Because of those physical withdrawals, and physical withdrawals can be very painful. With opioids, we see things like muscle aches, we see nausea, vomiting, we see blood pressure raising, elevating. And then you have emotional withdrawals. People are fatigued, they're tired, they're angry, they're sad, and just trying to balance your emotions, that substance may be the thing that now leads them to believe that this is the only way that they can balance their emotions. I really want us to understand that when we get to this point down the line where it goes from wanting it to needing it, that we're talking about a disease. And we now have an epidemic that we're calling the opioid crisis. And in this epidemic, we've seen a lot of the disease. People going from first use, like this gentleman I talked about in his 60s, from first use to dependence. And in that dependence, not knowing how to back out of that situation. Imagine someone with, let's say, type 2 diabetes. With type 2 diabetes, they were doing what they normally did, and what they normally did maybe got them to a point where they were unhealthy and found their way to higher blood sugar. And now not having to live with ever before with regulating the intake of food, now they find themselves on this spectrum, on this diabetic spectrum. Same thing. It's the same thing. We're talking about disease, we're talking about disease management, and we're talking about, in this case, we're talking about some choices that may have led to that. But once you get to a point where it's not a choice anymore, it is not a choice anymore, because you're not wanting it anymore. You're needing it in order to feel normal. Either way. So let's relate this to our kids. And as we relate this to our kids, you have about 1 in 8 kids, 1 out of 8 kids who are misusing an illicit substance. What do you think is the average age of first use? Go ahead and drop that in the chat box. When on average do kids start use for the first time? When do they jump on that line for the first time? Okay, see on the 13, 13. Okay. 16, 12, 10, okay. Okay. One says 12 to 13. Okay, 11. Okay. Middle school, okay. Okay. Okay, so on average, this is nationally, on average, first use is about 12 years old. And my next question was going to be, what grade is that? What grade is that? So think about yourself. What grade were you in when you were 12 years old? What grade were you in? And then we're going to get wild in here in just a second. We're going to get really wild because I'm going to have you all unmute yourselves. I'm going to have somebody have you all unmute yourselves and somebody tell me, what are the things that, so 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, What are the things that 5th through 7th graders typically like to do? What are some of the things that they like to do? Someone or someone's, unmute yourself and tell us, what are the things that 5th through 7th graders typically like to do?
Play sports.
Play sports. Absolutely. Be with friends. Absolutely. Any other things?
Play video games.
Play video games. Absolutely. Social media. Absolutely. Okay, now think about you when you were 5th through 7th grade. What did you like to do when you were 5th through 7th grade?
Play basketball.
Play basketball. Okay.
Ride my bike.
Yes. How many bike riders are in here? I was a bike rider. Yes. And you would even ask the question, can we go ride bikes? I don't even know if that question exists anymore. Does that question even exist anymore? Do kids ask that? Can we go ride bikes? Play soccer, go out with friends, play with Barbies? Absolutely. So now we find ourselves at an age where, in addition to those things, we do see substance use, first intentional use with the intention of doing something that's not for a prescription that a doctor is given or an over-the-counter medication that a parent has authorized. We find ourselves doing this because of many social reasons. And it may be because I want to be with my friends. I want to go out with my friends. And the 5-year-old still asks to go out and ride bikes. I love it, love it, love it, love it. So what do you all think as kids are finding their way to each other? We have an opioid crisis we're in, that's clear. Kids are starting at 12 years old, first use. The opioid crisis was a little bit different, the start of it, because it did also include older adults who were a lot of times needing it for pain management, a lot of times. However, typically when we talk about making a person living a life of living with an addiction or living with a substance use disorder or substance misuse disorder, it typically doesn't start in the adult years. It typically starts at that first use at about age 12. What do you think are the 3 most popular substances today, misused today by youth? And you can unmute yourself.
Marijuana. Yeah.
Okay. Weed, marijuana. Okay. Okay. Yep. Yes, yes, yes. So I see marijuana, I see meth, I see vaping, fentanyl pills. Okay. Okay, Xanax. Okay. Popular, popular, popular. Okay, I see the comments are slowing down. So let's go here, you all. So the 3 most popular, they have been the 3 most popular for a really long time. Things have changed in the landscape, but they have been the 3 most popular for a really long time. The number 1, Diana hit it on the head. Alcohol is number 1. However, in 20 years of doing this, I never thought that I would see something rival alcohol. Alcohol is typically the first substance that kids found their way to until about 2015. In 2015, what became popular? What kind of hit the scene? It's not as popular as it is now, but it kind of hit the scene. And someone already said it further up.
Marijuana.
So marijuana was there, but it's the way that it's used. And yes, is that Bo? Vaping. Vaping in 2015 became this thing where it was really supposed to be to help adults kick a cigarette habit. That's why it was created. It was harm reduction for cigarettes. Now we have to have this conversation about youth trends as we talk about the opioid crisis, because typically substance use disorders and addiction do not happen in adulthood. Typically, they don't. they happen before the age of 18. And if you ask, there was actually a study done by Costa Columbia where they asked those, or they found out those who are addicted, living with a substance use disorder today, asked how many of them, if they started before the age of 18, if they started before the age of 18, 90% of people living with a substance use disorder had their first use before the age of 18. So if we are starting before the age of 18, it increases the risk of dependence and substance use disorder and addiction. It increases. So if we're on that line, remember down here's first use, up there is addiction. If we're on that line, as soon as I jump on the line, my risk of moving towards addiction, it increases. Now with alcohol, alcohol is still number one. If a young person uses alcohol before the age of 15, they're 5 times more likely to struggle with a substance use disorder later in life. Does that mean that they will have a substance use disorder? No, that does not mean that. And the likelihood increases. It's very much like adverse childhood experiences. So if I have more adverse childhood experiences, I'm more likely to experience negative health outcomes. I'm more likely to experience negative social outcomes. I'm more likely to experience these things. So if I'm going to play with odds, I'm not a gambler at all, but if I were going to play with odds, I'd want to play with some odds that were in my favor. So it increases the likelihood 5 times more. After alcohol, we are now talking about marijuana. Yes, marijuana is now rivaling alcohol, and specifically vapes. Vapes are rivaling alcohol. So are kids just vaping tobacco? And tobacco is number 3. That's the 3rd most popular. So are they just vaping tobacco, or are they vaping marijuana concentrates? Now, if they're getting it from, I don't know, Amazon, I don't believe that Amazon sells THC. I'll have to go and check that this week. The last time I checked Amazon, they were not selling THC. But, a couple of you might be going to check right now to see if Amazon sells THC. Highly unlikely, right? But the device is there on Amazon. The device by itself is not an issue, but the knowledge that we have around it, the norms that we have around it. So imagine in this triangle, if a young person has their access to the substance is available in their community, and the norms say that support them doing it, they're going to be more likely to do it. So if vaping started as harm reduction for adults, but then they started putting mango flavors, grape flavors, cherry flavors, pina colada, all of these different things to entice those who might be interested in cotton candy vapes or cotton candy weed, well, they're probably going to be more likely to use that. So access, availability, and norms increases the likelihood that a youth will use. So today what we are seeing is that THC concentrates, extracting the THC from the plant, putting it in the vape, and this is the method of use. Why do youth start doing this? Why are they doing this? What do you all think? And I want real life answers, like why today are youth doing this?
I'll go. My niece started using meth at the age of 11. I believe honestly, because her mom introduced it to her, she was kind of used as like the bait to go get it, because nobody would ever suspect an 11-year-old to pick up drugs.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. And so the point that you bring into the conversation is norms, right? So if that young person finds that the people around them, if the adult norms around them say it's okay to use, or it's not a problem, or you're not going to get in trouble for it by me, then that encourages use. The other point with someone younger going to get it and someone not suspecting, youth do that to each other as well. So older brothers and sisters or older cousins or older friends. When youth are hanging out with older people, they are not going to be the ones suspected. And so they're usually they'll be put on the hook to get it, just like you just explained. And that will contribute to use. Absolutely. Yeah. So first use or the first couple of use, why do they continue? And let me add this. With first use, sometimes it's peer pressure. Sometimes it is just because somebody suggested it and they were curious. Sometimes it's fun. The party's happening, the game is happening, everybody's at the barbecue or everybody's in the backyard hanging out at the family party or whatever. But why do they continue? To fit in or be popular? And I don't know if these came from, okay, yes, medicating themselves, dulling themselves. Yes, it's easy to hide. Vapes are really easy to hide and they don't smell, especially if you don't know what you're looking for. Stress. Stress is a big reason. In fact, that is the #1 reason that they continue to use. So we go back to, again, you all talked about what you like to do and what kids like to do at between the ages of, or grades of 5th and 7th grade. What are they stressed about? What is stressing a 12-year-old out? What is stressful for a 14-year-old? And I'm not making light of it because there is a tremendous amount of stress at that age. Okay, can someone unmute yourself if you would go back to the 7th grade? Anybody in here? No, I see. Okay, I already saw head shakes. No. No? Would anybody go back to the 7th grade?
I would.
You would? Okay, so who is that saying that?
It's Becky. I don't think my name's coming up.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. Okay. So can I make an assumption?
Yeah, go ahead.
One or two things. You were either super popular or you could care less what everybody thought.
I could care less what everybody thought.
That's right. It's one or the other. It's
Yeah.
one or the other. You either have the person who was really popular and is like, absolutely, I'd do that again, or that young person who was so well adjusted, they didn't care. That's not the norm. That's not the norm. And if we can get our kids to develop some of that, it definitely helps with those early middle school years. And can I just put a public service announcement out there? Our 9th graders who are on our high school campuses right now are basically like our 7th graders. Because remember, the last time that they were at school full-time, a full school year, they were in the 6th grade. The last time they were on campus for a full school year. So we make it through this school year. This will be the first full school year on a school campus since 6th grade for them. These are our 9th graders. 7th grade, after spring break, they were told don't come back. 8th grade, they didn't go at all. And 9th grade, they just came back for a full school year. So they're still trying to work out some of those things. And that stress has now found its way onto our high school campus. Stress is caused by home life. It's caused by lots of expectations, social expectations, emotional expectations. You have to regulate yourself. You have to be stoic, or you have to be, especially when we think about our boys, you have to be tough. You have to be a man. At 11 years old, I don't know which 11-year-old in 2022 has developed a full manhood, but they are expected to be that way. And so that there is stress there. You're expected to look good. Absolutely. All of the above. So let's take a look at, oops, I kind of got ahead of myself. I have lots of things going with this fancy PowerPoint. I got ahead of myself and asked you what they're using to get high, but what I do want to show you, if you are unfamiliar with the devices, can you give me a thumbs up when your emoji if you recognize these devices? So go ahead and click your, at the bottom, or if you're on a phone, I think it's the drop. Okay, I see you all. Okay, so just give me a good idea of who knows what they're seeing here. Okay, okay, good deal. Okay, so give me a thumbs up if you've ever seen someone, thank you, Trisha, if you've ever seen someone in public using one of these. Thumbs up. Yeah. So if you're a 70s or 80s kids or baby, 60s kids or baby, it might still be startling to see someone coming out of a convenience store puffing on what looks like a pipe, because throughout the 80s, this is just not what you saw. But the device, again, is legal. The devices have always been legal. It's once you put an illegal substance in it that it becomes an issue. So when we're talking about vapes, these are some of the devices that you want to be familiar with. I won't go through a full, like, let's look at all of the devices, but I will give you a little homework. What I do want you to Google in your free time, I want you to Google vape devices or vapes, one of the two of those. You'll find lots of different hits for it, but I want you to Google it, and then I want you to click on images. So if you're Googling, I want you to click on images so that you can get familiar with what the device looks like. I think there's more of us who know or have seen the devices now, but some of them are still a little unfamiliar, like the disposable devices. Now the devices that are like it's almost like the old one-hitter pipes, but the devices, you no longer need to use it a second time. And those are sold in just our convenience stores. Here, it would be like a Circle K. But in your big box, big brand convenience stores, you can find those in there. Now, in California, you all are a little bit ahead of the curve with the flavored vapes and flavored devices, or I'm sorry, flavored tobacco, where you're seeing bans on it, but the rest of the country is catching on. But you guys are a little bit ahead. So what are we gonna do? How do we deal with this? How do we deal with it? So let's talk about prevention. First thing, one, you have to talk to your kids, and you have to talk to them often. You have to have the awkward conversations. And those awkward conversations, when we're talking about younger kids, like let's say my 6-year-old, right? You want that younger kid to know you don't smoke anything. You don't smoke anything, nothing. You're not getting the puffy cigarettes off the ice cream truck. You don't smoke anything, because that starts imitation behavior. And when they start to imitate, then they get the courage to continue on. And that may look like some kids continuing on to imitate, or that may look like some kids continuing on to try the real thing. Either way, for some prevention, we don't smoke anything. Human beings were never meant to inhale smoke. The number one reason people die from house fires is smoke inhalation, right? So we were never meant to inhale into our lungs smoke. To make sure that they know your expectations. If they know your expectations, thank you. If they know your expectations about the drug use policies in your home or for your family, then that is a huge protective factor. It is a huge protective factor. Now we can all feel like, my kid wouldn't do that, or I trust my kid. Absolutely trust them. Absolutely. You want to make sure that that trust is there and they know that you trust them. And you also want to make sure that they know specifically what you're supposed to do. My kids were supposed to wash the dishes before they left for school yesterday, and they didn't. They did not. I didn't tell them again to wash the dishes, even though that's the rule every single day, wash the dishes. But because I didn't say it yesterday, they said, you didn't say that we were supposed to wash the dishes before we left. You live in this house just like I do. Why would you not think to wash the dishes? Because I didn't remind them. You have to make sure that the kids know what your expectations are. Parents are the number one protective factor. If you say to them, my expectation is that you don't drink, or my expectation is that you don't drink before 21, or my expectation is if someone offers it to you, that you can come home and tell me. My expectation is that if you tell me, you're going to get a free pass. And that goes right into, if you see at the bottom of the right-hand side, have a get out of the situation plan. They call it an exit strategy, an exit plan, a fail-proof, something like that. Have a plan. And it's not just your plan, it's their plan. It is their plan. You can liken it to anybody in here allergic to anything like peanut butter, or have a kid or child who's allergic to that, like peanut butter or cashews or something like that? Give me a thumbs up if you live the allergy life. Anybody? No? Okay. No. Okay. So, okay, I see a few of you. So even if you don't live the allergy life in your home, we all now kind of have some stipulations when you're in certain settings where you can't have like peanuts, for example, right? That's the big one. You can't take peanut butter sandwiches anywhere if it's a school outing a lot of times, right? And we know there's an expectation around that that's been created, so we're more likely to follow it, very similar to that. So we're going to live the prevention life, just like we live the allergy life or the substance misuse life. We're going to live that life so that it is known these are what the expectations are, so that we're more likely to follow them. And also you want to make sure with that, what if they don't follow it? Or what if they do? Consequences. Consequences, that's not a bad word, right? You have negative consequences and you have positive consequences. So what are some of the consequences? And if you don't have any, just say that. And I'm going to have you unmute yourself on this. What are some of the consequences that your kids have if they do what you expect of them? What are some of the consequences yours have? If they do what you expect. Let's not all talk at once. Oh, I see some of you typing.
Okay, I'll go again.
Okay, thank you.
You're talking about a positive, right?
Yeah,
So
if they do what
yeah,
you want them to do.
yeah.
Yeah.
So my kids are pretty good about doing, what they're told. We either go to the bookstore, Barnes and Nobles, or we do lunch dates,
Okay.
stuff that they like to do. So yeah,
Okay.
for the most part, I don't have a problem with my kids being told what to do.
So let me ask you this, Becky. Do they
Sure.
know that they will get X if they do Y, or is it like random?
They pretty much know. They know they know how I am, and like what my expectations are for them, like with school,
Okay.
and also like in the house, like as far as like chores and stuff like that.
Okay.
Everybody helps out. So
Okay.
yeah.
Anyone else? Your expectations? Like sometimes I hear kids saying like, or maybe I'm just older. I'll get like $5 per A. Now it's like $20 per A, inflation, right? Like they get paid for these grades. So anybody have anything like that where your kids know?
My children know that they get to feel good. We always do the intrinsic motivation. So they're
Okay.
not given extrinsic motivators as much as this is the right thing to do. And it feels good when you do the right thing and accomplish it.
Okay. Okay. Anybody have toddlers that require snacks? No one? See, I always say this. I always say this. Toddlers are gangster, right? Like toddlers are, they are so gangster. They don't care about your life. They don't care about your job. They don't care about your friends. They don't care that you didn't eat lunch or you didn't sleep well last night. They don't care. They don't care. If you have told them that they're going to get that snack the next day, they will remember it and they will hold you to it the next day. They will remember it. And if you give them a time frame and you're not on it, on point on that time frame, they're going to call you on it. They're going to call you on it. But we teach them over time to expect not to be held to that standard. So my second piece of homework for you, the first piece of homework, and let's see who put it in here. Ruth went ahead and put the vape pens, the mods, the box mods, the jewels. You can Google all of that, right? But the second piece of homework, I want you to have a very specific, this is what I'm going to give my child the next time they do something I want them to do, and I'm going to tell them. But you have to tell them. You have to tell them what that's going to be. If it's a hug, if it's a high five, if it's $20, whatever. whatever. But the key piece is you have to tell them. You want the consequences to be for better or for worse. They should know what they get if they do what's expected, and they should know what they get if they don't do what's expected. This is prevention. This is prevention, and this is also building in self-regulation. If they make the decision and you have told them, they are making an informed decision. They're making an informed decision. Other than that, oh gosh, they don't play the games the way that we want them to play because we change sometimes, right? If I go play Super Mario Brothers, I know exactly how to win and exactly how to lose. But I don't know how to play mom, because mom changes the rules all the time. Dad changes the rules. Auntie changes all the rules. Nana changes the rules. And Nana will give up everything. Oh, just take it, right? Yeah. At least take that one. And you have that conversation with them. If you do this, we're going to do this. And just tell them, this lady told me to do this, and we're going to practice this one time. So then at least you can see how it feels to get what you want or get what you don't want when you have put in place that this is exactly what happens. Not just, oh, well, you know what I expect. And I do it. My kids know what I expect. They do. But just be in the practice of it a little bit, being in the practice of something, it just helps us to know that we can duplicate it. We can replicate it. So what happens if you're in a situation where you need to intervene? So we have to have this conversation about intervention before we wrap up today. With intervention, we're talking about what happens if your kid is in a situation where they have come into contact with something that is one of those things you don't expect. Well, one, make sure that you know what your local resources are, and you also have local coalitions and treatment in California. So in intervention, we're talking about this kid is not just at first use. After first use, they go to experimentation. And experimentation is where it's like, well, I tried that, I like that, or I tried that, I didn't like that, and so I'm gonna try something else. Or people are suggesting something else to me. And so let's just see, right? So I had some alcohol, and now I'm gonna have some alcohol and weed, or now I'm gonna vape at the football game while everybody's drinking, and we're all gonna do this, or we're gonna try some pills. Experimentation. Social use comes next. And with social use, this is now like, it kind of becomes a thing that we do because we're hanging out. So we're hanging out, and everybody just kind of smokes and drinks when we hang out. That's social use, right? And I may only do it in those social environments, only in the social environments, not in my bedroom by myself. Then we go to recreational use. We're still going down the line, right? First use, we're up to recreational use. And at recreational use, I say, this is how I recreate. This is how I recreate the situations that I want to be in. It's a sport for me. This is what I do. I get high. I smoke weed. That's when we get to the point of recreational use. And from recreational use, we keep going down the line, we can find ourselves at dependence. I might be emotionally dependent. And there used to be a time where we only talked about emotional or social dependence for weed. But now we know that there is some physical dependence as well, especially because the THC level is so much higher and the way that it's administered has changed. So it's not Cheech and Chong's weed. It's not the same weed. It's not even like Snoop and Dre's weed from the 90s. This is a whole different level that is having a different impact on the body and on the mind. And so with such high levels of THC, we're seeing kids have like psychotic breaks. We're seeing even things that look like psychosis. We're seeing things that look like paranoid schizophrenia. So we're seeing things that have a greater impact, and that isn't just impacting that kid, it can have an environmental impact also. Whatever is happening with that child in that situation, it can be very dangerous for them, and also can be dangerous for the people around them. Now, as we're down here at this level of dependence, I'm going to challenge all of us, if we're not there already, to make sure that we're not just looking at it as a choice. That person has continued to use for a reason. The stresses in their lives, what's happening at home, what's not happening at home, school, comparison. We just have so many scenarios now that kids have that many of us did not deal with or didn't deal with openly. Yeah, yes, it does look like a conveyor belt. And so if we stay on that conveyor belt and we keep down the road and we don't know how to get off somewhere because maybe someone didn't intervene, or maybe because I thought, well, nobody cares anyway, so I'm going to keep doing it, or maybe because it was fun. Maybe because it was fun, and now I've accidentally ended up in this place with all this intention that I had back here to have fun, to escape things, to cope with things. Am I making sense to you all? So with intervention, having local resources, not being afraid to say something. Say something when you see that the stress level is high. Say something when you see that the social withdrawal or the social changes are happening. Say something before they get to the 7th grade. Let them know what's about to hit them. Except for, I think it was Becky, right, who would go back. Say something before you get there. When it comes to opioids, carrying naloxone is a good idea. Naloxone is the antidote. It's the reversal, or Narcan, whichever way you look at it. Narcan is the nasal spray. Naloxone is the injectable. And then having a support network. Make sure that your kids have an extra ACE. ACEs just means that, and I don't mean ACEs like adverse childhood experiences. I mean an ACE in their pocket. Someone that they know that they can reach out to when you are not available, or because maybe they need a buffer between you and whatever the situation is. Make sure they have an ACE. Do you know who your child's ACE is? Do you know who that youth who you work with, do you know who their ACE is? Who is that person that they want? They want to know that they're doing well. Think about yourself. Who was that person for you? Was it a neighbor? Was it a coach? Was it a teacher? Was it clergy? Who was that person for you? And make sure the kids that you're working with have that ACE in their pocket. They can always reach out to that person. That adult has to be positive. That adult has to have high attainable expectations for the kids. High attainable expectations. A kid who can't read, expecting them to get an A in reading may not be attainable at this time. It may not be attainable, but getting better at reading, yes, that can be attainable, especially with additional support. So additionally with intervention, what do you do if you see a child or someone, not even just a child, a young person is experiencing overdose? So this is what we know is happening right now. We don't have as many youth fatalities with opioids as we have overdoses. We have seen the numbers of youth overdoses increasing. That is not likely with youth substance use. This is a never before territory that we are in. Kids have used for a long time. And in fact, 90s kids, the kids in the 90s used more than other kids any other time period that was recorded. Okay, so the substance misuse, substance abuse rate was really high in the mid 90s for youth. Overdoses were not a part of that. It was not a part of that. And now we're seeing a pretty significant amount of overdoses. Fatalities, yes, we're seeing some fatalities. For you all in Ventura County, what you have, and I'm going to actually give you your number. You have about 12.7 overdoses per 100,000 is what you had. You're a small county, much smaller than LA County. And in LA County, there were less overdoses per 100,000 people. So you have less people, but you had more overdoses per 100,000. And then you guys border Santa Barbara County, and Santa Barbara County is less than you all. So if you go up the coast, it's getting better. You go down the coast, it's worse, but you border those two areas. So the access is there. You want to protect your kids. What does an opioid overdose look like? Pinpoint pupils. And with pinpoint pupils, not much light is getting through the pupils. Something that's a stimulant is going to have blown out pupils. Like they're going to be very big, the pupils. And so they can't keep their eyes open. They're trying to close their eyes more because the light getting in hurts. This is not the case with opioids. With opioids, it's pinpoint. So the eyes can be very open, in fact. And the pupils are just very small. You'll see like pale, clammy face, and also like pale, clammy skin. The person may be unconscious or they may be awake, but they're unresponsive. So you're calling their name and they're not saying anything. Some of these symptoms can look like other illnesses as well, like a stroke, for example. It can look like that. But let's put them all together, okay? So they might be unresponsive or they might be unconscious. They may be breathing really slow. Opioids are a central nervous system depressant. So it is going to slow everything down. The heart rate is typically going to slow down. The breathing is going to be slow and shallow. Sometimes you'll hear what's called like a death rattle, and it's just a rattling where they are trying to breathe, but they're not really able to get the full breath that they need. So it's a very slow, shallow breath. And then they may have blue or purplish fingernails, or the tips of fingers here, or the skin. For a light-skinned person, the skin would be blue or purplish, but for a darker skinned person, it would be like grayish or like sort of like an ashen look to the skin. So these are all signs of overdose. These are signs of overdose. How can you help with that? Carrying naloxone is always a way to help with that. Call 911. For sure, call 911. You want to roll that person on their side. And when you do carry naloxone, now here's the thing about naloxone. Some people will ask, well, what happens if the person is not overdosing from naloxone? Overdosing from an opioid. Naloxone and Narcan will not do anything if it is not an opioid overdose. The way that it works is it blocks the opioid receptors. So if you inject or have a person inhale the Narcan and it's not opioids, it's not going to hurt. What I will tell you is with the potency and with what's happening with like fentanyl, the majority of the overdoses now are connected to fentanyl. And what I have heard specifically from the DEA is that if the pills are coming off the street, if it is these fake Oxycontin, or it's something that's hand to hand off the street, because maybe they've purchased it on social media because someone posted on Instagram or TikTok that they had whatever, was needed and they delivered it to the house, they can pretty much just assume that it has fentanyl in it. And it only takes a couple granules to overdose on fentanyl. The difference between fentanyl and even heroin is significant. It's a striking difference. It does not take very much to overdose on it. So again, if it is not that, the naloxone and Narcan will not hurt. But if it is that, it may take more than one dose of naloxone and Narcan. And what we are seeing is multiple doses of the two that need to be distributed. And usually when you carry it, it comes in a 2-pack. So you would at least have 2 doses on you, and make sure you stay with the person just afterwards, whatever's happening. Once that is administered, don't leave the person. It's an emergency, a medical emergency situation. So I want to ask you all, do you have any questions before I just kind of lay out what these resources are? I did not play the video that I had intended for you, and I am going to drop those videos in the chat box. Pull them onto your desktop or save it. Let me go to the video. So I'm going to play this. I'm going to drop this one in Spanish first. Here we are. So this one is in Spanish, and this one comes, both of these videos are going to be from HIDTA. That's the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Association, and they are the ones who, at least along border states, they manage what's coming in to the states. And so here in Arizona, this comes out of our resources for the Arizona HIDTA, but it's just a general opioid resource. And then I'm going to drop the English one in there. If you play the English one with subtitles on, it does, it works pretty well. Oh, if I can find it. Oh, here it is. So as I'm dropping this in, just really quick as a glance over this, your California Department of Public Health has some really amazing resources on it. And so that you can be in the know and what your state is doing about opioids, that first, you can just go to the California Department of Public Health and go to what you need to know. And if you go to what you need to know, you'll see lots of resources related to prevention, intervention, and treatment. And then SAMHSA the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Association, they also have tons of resources. Just get on there and search opioids. And then naloxone or Narcan, you do have organizations that distribute it, and you should be able to just get it over the counter as well. But you have organizations that distribute it, and you can find, you should be able to find a list on your DHCS page. So that's your Department of Health as well. So let me drop the English one in there. And while I'm doing that, questions.
It looks like there's a question from Judy Basco in the chat.
Oh,
She
got
was,
it. Okay. Are there any treatment alternatives in California for extreme situations? Yes, I've been told that a child has to give consent for treatment in most situations. One family I know of is having their child in residential treatment facility outside California. They have the financial means to do this. Most agencies on this Zoom meeting probably deal with families that cannot pay for such treatment. Absolutely. So you do have medical assisted treatment in California, and with opioids, medical assisted treatment has been working pretty well. There's a locator. You can go on SAMHSA.gov and then just put in your zip code or put in your state or your county, and you can find the medical assistant, MAT is what it's called, right? You can find the MAT facilities, and you can also nail it down to just adolescent facilities that treat adolescents. And it will tell you if it's out-of-pocket pay, if it's grant subsidized. But California is so big, I looked a bit in Ventura County to see what I could find there. And your California Department of Public Health is your best resource for local, but SAMHSA. Go to SAMHSA Treatment Locator. And on that treatment locator, you will be able to find, you just kind of shift through it based on what you're looking for. So if you want to do out of pocket, or if you want to do partial insurance, partial private pay, or 100% covered, you can find it there. And you have your Ventura County resource for behavioral health, the behavioral health department. Thank you, Brad. Okay. I do need to drop in. I'm going to stop the share really quickly after my slide says thank you. Oops. I had to do the formal thank you. And then I'm going to stop the share so that I can drop the video. The video gives you kind of the lived experience of an individual, just so we can understand like what the magnitude is if you yourself have not experienced what it has been like for families to lose someone or kids to lose someone. We had a situation here just before the pandemic where kids bought something from someone online, and there were 3, maybe 4 of them, and they all decided that they were going to take it in the same night. And it just so happens that one of the kids' dads walked towards his room. He never does that at night. He did it, and he found him on the floor having no idea what was going on. And then, and the paramedics, you know, they got them there. But once he started going through his phone, he realized that his friends were saying that they were taking it too. So that same night, they got the paramedics over to their houses. They had 3 kids in the ER that night, trying to save them from opioid overdoses. And all of them had products with fentanyl in them. So, like I said, this is like, not that we hadn't seen kids using substances before, it's a new territory seeing kids overdose on substances. And that is just not, that has not been typical in the history of substance use and youth substance use. So I'm still trying to grab for you that video.
Joronda is available to answer questions, and I know we're coming upon 12 o'clock, but I am sure we can stay a few minutes after if any of you want to ask any specific questions. And Jackie will have all of this information. Kids and Families Together Care Provider Training Program will have all this information if you aren't able to capture some of it today, and we can share it with you direct. We also will have an evaluation link. I believe Jackie's already pasted it into the chat box, both in Spanish and in English. So if you can fill the evaluation form, that form helps us keep informed about who is attending these presentations and that our outreach is reaching as many in the community as we can. So not only are we evaluating what you've learned today, but also what part of the community do you partake in as either a resource parent, a care provider, a professional, a social worker. So please fill those evaluations out for us. They're very important. And then we will open the arena for any questions. You can unmute yourself or you can ask them in the chat box. I already feel like we have to line Joronda up for a part 2, so we can come back and go even deeper on some of these concepts. So we've just come upon 12 o'clock. So if it's 12 o'clock and you're turning into a pumpkin because that was the ending time of our training today, feel free to step off. And if you'd like to stay and ask any questions or put anything in the chat box, please feel free to do so, because we will be happy to stay on for a little while and connect with you. Thank you so, so much. And please join us next Wednesday, March 23rd, 5:30 to 7 p.m., where Sarah Rex Mayo will come forward and share with us ways to really lift that self-esteem in our young people and help them be the best that they can be. So with that, Joronda, we thank you so much for your expertise and time today. And we're so honored that you joined our community. Thank you so much. And we're going to stay on a little bit for anyone who might want to.
Thank you all. I did drop the treatment locator in there for SAMHSA, so if anyone's looking for that resource, I can't get the video into the chat box. Not sure
Well,
why it won't go
we
there.
can make sure we get a
Okay.
link
Okay,
for that,
perfect.
and we can certainly send it out to the participants
Okay.
as a follow-up. Thank you all and have a great day, and keep those children safe.